Neuvillette is the brand new Hydro 5-star just added to Genshin Impact. Being Hydro, he's extremely versatile, as Hydro is, in my opinion, the best element in the game. He fits with an inordinate amount of teams, and I've spent the last 9 hours straight testing every single team I could think of with this character for a total of 25 teams and variations, to see how well each of these would work, when they are and aren't good, how free-to-play friendly he is, and more. I also want to talk about whether or not you need his signature weapon, how impactful it is, as well as going over his kit and build so you have a complete idea of how to build him, and if you can find a great team for him on your account. Welcome to Jello Impact, where we build and test every single character to help you decide who you want to wish for and build. I'm going to start with an overview of his kit, strengths and weaknesses, then go into my findings from the 25 teams I've tested him with. If you're just interested in the teams, then feel free to skip ahead. Neuvillette is an on-field Hydro DPS, driver, Hydro applicator, depending on how you want to look at it. His main way of dealing damage is through his charge attacks, which are not at all like regular charge attacks. After taking time to charge up, or consuming source water droplets created by his skill and burst to charge up instantly, he enters a special state where he unleashes what can only be described as massive hydro pumps at the opponent. They deal very impressive raw damage, likely because his damage scales entirely off his HP stat rather than attack, similar to Yelan. This means traditional buffers like Bennett, artifact sets like Tenacity or Noblesse do not work with him, as they all increase attack, and that does nothing. His skill and burst main function is to create these source water droplets to allow you to instantly charge up his charge attacks, because if you don't have these droplets available, it takes an absolutely crazy amount of time to charge up. His burst has a 70 energy cost, but it's usually not a huge issue. As an on-fielder, he will catch the majority of particles created by the team, and sometimes the way your rotations will work will mean you will use your skill twice per rotation. In addition, two of his best weapons, both his signature and his best free-to-play option, both restore energy. And if your rotation is extended a bit, it's usually not a huge deal, as rotations with real-life enemies can vary a lot. His passive gives him a really solid damage bonus the more types of teammates he has, and although it's not necessary to build around this, he will almost always get at least the second level of this, if not the third and final level. His passive gives him a further hydro damage bonus the more health he has, but it's not really something you can control, and it's not really worth thinking about, just a nice source of passive damage that's there. Now that we understand the basics for his kit, let's talk about his strengths and weaknesses. After playing him a lot, when I'm using his charge attack, he feels like a really epic character to play. I feel powerful, I feel strong, I feel like his presence on the field is imposing and impactful. He's a very satisfying character to play. He also has really good mobility, which definitely contributes to this satisfying feeling. He has ridiculous range. I was really surprised by how far his hydro cannons actually reach. I think he probably has the best range out of any character of this style. It really, because it's a continuous amount of damage, unlike a charge attack from a bow user, even when enemies are moving around and a bit more mobile, you can follow them and catch on to them. It's not like you charge up a shot and then miss. You can actually just adjust where you're aiming and fire at them. It's really quite very unique and very satisfying. It's one of the most unique play styles in Genshin Impact. He has so many teams. Obviously, we're going to go through all 25 that I tested, and you could even extrapolate that further into 30 or 35 variations. But I really did feel like I had to test that many just to get an idea of each and every one and different ways that they could play. And lots of them do feel like they play differently. So I think if you're someone who likes variety, he's a very good character for that. He has strong damage, even stronger with his signature weapon, but it is rather strong even with the prototype Amber. He has decent free-to-play friendly options with good options for vertical investment as well. For weaknesses, I said this in my pre-release based on what I saw, and I do stand by it. For a lot of enemies in the game, not every single enemy, I might have been a bit overblown, but I think he really needs some sort of resistance to interruption to really feel good. Nothing is worse than just starting up your charge attack, or even you can't get it out. He consumes the source water droplets and you just get smacked by the Magu Kenki, and it doesn't matter if he has a little bit of resistance interruption, or if you have Beto, or if you have something like that. Maybe you can take one hit with Beto, but unless you've got a proper shielder, something like the Crab or the Magu Kenki, or for example the Mechs, These are characters that's attacks have a lot of AoE, so even though you have a ton of range, you can't physically back up enough to get out of them, or they're too fast. Similar with the Consecrated Beasts, not that I've been able to test them in this Abyss, but there's certain types of attacks that he just can't dodge away from, because if you ever dash, if you ever dodge, your stacks are completely gone and you lose all the damage you had. So it's imperative that you do not get knocked out of your charge attack, because the healing from his kit actually gives you healing. And I obviously should have mentioned that along with my kit overview, but when he consumes those source water droplets, he actually heals himself. So what that means is you're a lot less reliant on a healer. However, you are reliant again on that resistance to interruption, at least when you're against aggressive enemies. And finally, his final con is he doesn't really have any off-field hydro application. He doesn't really have any off-field presence. Wasn't really a massive deal. I didn't really find it a huge issue, but it is something to take note of. Normally, I do discuss value and power level in these review videos, but this video is already going to be so long that that's going to be a whole separate video tomorrow, where we'll talk about if he's worth summoning, how strong he is, how valuable he is, where I'd put him on the tier list, where I'd compare him to other characters. We're going to talk about all of that on tomorrow's video, so make sure to subscribe for that. I am both sad and happy to say that once again, at free-to-play level, his best team is definitely his Hyper Bloom team. If you don't have a signature weapon, if you don't have any constellations, this is going to be the best team. It's a great looking team, excellently designed characters, 3 Archons and our pseudo Archon Neuvillette. This is a team that feels very strong, very simple to play with no complex rotations. You just set up your Nahida, set up your Raiden, set up your Zhongli, go to town with Neuvillette. When you have downtime, you can refresh some skills, refresh the shields, but it's a very intuitive team. It's definitely the team that I would recommend for most people, especially if you don't have a signature weapon. It's not that you need a signature weapon for other teams to be good, but it's less noticeable that he doesn't have a signature weapon on this team than other teams. I did try an absolute huge amount of variations with this team, and so one thing that I was surprised by was that I switched Baiju for Nahida here, and I switched Zhongli for Kazuha so that I could get some Hydro Swirls on Neuvillette and I could reduce their Hydro resistance. I found that this worked really well. We didn't get as many Hyper Blooms, but we increased his personal damage a lot. So if you don't have Nahida or don't want to use Nahida, or you don't have Zhongli but you do have Kazuha, etc., then this is a great option. I also switched Raiden for Kuki. I really didn't find that I lost very much time at all. I found that the clear times were relatively the same. I didn't even find it a whole lot less comfortable most of the time. Sometimes there were times where it was nice that Raiden could proc the Hyper Blooms from a lot further away. She has bigger range with her skill, but most of the time I didn't find it an issue. So I think regardless of whether you want to use Kuki or you want to use Raiden, it's going to be totally fine. I also tested Layla very extensively, and I thought that the Layla Hyper Bloom teams were really good. I didn't notice that huge of a difference from her to Zhongli. There was a difference, but both of them exceeded expectations. They cleared very well. I thought Layla was going to be a bit of a cope option, but if you don't have Zhongli, you just have Layla, that is totally fine. I didn't actually test Kirara. I don't think it's going to be that much worse, but I do think you might lose out on that triple reaction buff, because when I did test Baiju in this slot, which I did, I actually found I didn't like it as much as using Baiju as the only Dendro and replacing Nahida with something like Fischl. So switching out these characters is getting difficult. So I'm going to pull up my list of teams and go through each one. Neuvillette, Fischl, Kazuha, Zhongli. Really great team. One of the best. I found that when I had his signature weapon, this team was very comparable to the Hyper Bloom team. When you really need the grouping, it's going to perform better. And in single target, I found that it performed slightly worse, although it is trickier to play, to get the rotations right, to make sure everything is, you're always having that Kazuha buff, everything like that. I do think it's very possible that it even has a higher ceiling than the Hyper Bloom team, but because it's not as brain dead to play, and this was my first day playing the character, if I was to bet my life on which clear I would get a faster clear on and go through one on the Abyss, I would choose the Hyper Bloom team, but I really liked it. Placing Zhongli for Layla on this team, I liked it as well. I didn't find it all that much worse. I got very comparable clear times, no issues at all. Trading the defensive slot for Beidou, I didn't like this team when enemies were aggressive or when I was in single target. When I was in AoE and the enemies were not aggressive or fast enough to super quickly chase me down, I got amazing clear times with this team. So it's a bit of a niche team, a niche scenario. I know a lot of people were hoping to use Beidou as the main form of defensive utility. I don't think the interruption resistance is enough. That's my opinion after 9 hours of testing, but I do think that against certain AoE enemies, and if you can dodge around the enemy's attacks, if the enemies are capable of being dodged around like that, because sometimes they're just not, and it's not your fault, and they're cringe and they just attack you, there's nothing you can do. But in the right circumstance, amazing team. Adding in Baiju as the defensive utility, you're going to get a few Hyper Blooms here because Kazuha is going to infuse with Electro. Baiju is going to get some Hyper Blooms. You really want to make sure that you're swirling Hydro and Electro before sending out Baiju, because you don't want to remove that Hydro aura. You want to make sure that you get the swirl before you go into Baiju. Otherwise, great team. Didn't find it all that different than the other ones we've talked about. All of them were really good so far. Adding in Dea as the defensive utility. I try and put Dea everywhere I can. Unfortunately, this wasn't my favorite. I didn't like how when enemies, move out of the way, then out of the circle, you're playing circle impact with Dea. I don't like that. And even worse, I don't like that her resistance to interruption doesn't last a super long time. I would much rather recommend something like Layla or Diona. I didn't test Diona, and the reason why is because it's pretty clear that she's exactly the same as Layla, but with a weaker shield, and she provides healing. Because Neuvillette already heals himself, he really doesn't need extra healing. I never found myself dying. I never found that. The only time was I found myself being staggered. So Diona's weaker shield compared to Layla, I think makes her an always inferior choice. He also doesn't need, Neuvillette doesn't need the elemental mastery, but if you don't have a Layla, or if you already have Diona built up, then it's going to be fine. The shield is what you need, and so it's going to be fine. Next one I tested was Raiden, Nahida, Fischl. This is a Hyper Bloom team with hyper offense. We were using Fischl for extra damage and saying, hey, we heal ourselves, let's try and forgo defensive utility entirely. Again, this can work, but it's even more glass cannony than Beidou. Don't generally recommend it outside of speedrun, because the thing is, normally when you're running a glass cannon team, you rely on perfect dodges to dodge out of your on-fielder, but you can't dodge out of Neuvillette. You have to keep playing. Of course, you can end your charge attack early to dodge, or you can use your burst to iframe, which I did try and do, but overall it's just too much effort, not enough gain. Already talked about this team, love it, fantastic. Using Beidou as the defensive option in Hyper Bloom teams, it's decent. I don't hate it, but I feel like I'm running a Hyper Bloom team against mostly a single target bossing floor, and Beidou's defensive utility is just not as good as someone like Layla or Zhongli here, so don't prefer it. If I'm going to use Beidou, I'd rather use Kazuha Fischl as the other two, because then it's more focused on that AoE. Hyper Bloom with Anemo. I didn't hate this. Again, glass cannon team, very prone to stagger. Was nice to have the grouping. It's nice to get some more damage out of Neuvillette, but I would much rather put Baiju over Nahida here, and that way you get that some interruption resistance. Baiju's interruption resistance isn't perfect, but it's often more than enough, or it's often sufficient anyways, and the extra damage is actually worth losing Nahida for. I don't know if it's better. One day is not enough time to definitively tell which team is better, but I do think it has its upsides of being groupable, and the single target performance was very, very good. And obviously the AoE performance will definitely be better. Defensive utility wasn't the only way I tried to use Dea. I tried to use her as a Burgeon comp, and it wasn't that bad, but it wasn't particularly good either. Again, her resistance interruption just doesn't last that long, and the amount of Burgeons you're getting isn't that huge. I would much prefer to run a Toma Burgeon team. I didn't prefer this team that much, but it did work. I did 36 star the Abyss with it, so it's not like it's terrible by any means. So what if you don't have Kazuha? What if you choose to put Fischl on here instead? This team wasn't that bad. I did find it worse than the Kazuha team, and especially when enemies are a bit more spread out and you need that stronger grouping. But I found it quite good. If you don't have Kazuha, I think this is still sufficient. What I did notice, however, is when I switched out Zhongli for Layla, the team, I don't know, it just the combination of sacrificing two of the better options, it just brought the team down enough that I was like, oh, I'm playing a worse team now. It's not that it was terrible, but I just noticed, I'm like, oh, something feels worse. So having that Zhongli and Kazuha was the best. Going down to Sucrose, not that bad. Going down to Layla, almost the same. But when I went down with both of them, then it felt worse. Now, do keep in mind one thing. I only have like Constellation 2 or 3 Sucrose. So if you have C6, you infuse it with Hydro, that's going to feel better. And I don't have C4 Layla. So if you get C4, it's going to boost his charge attack damage. That's going to raise up the potential of this team. So maybe that brings it up to the point where it doesn't feel that much worse. I could definitely see it. I can only test with what I have though. But I still think the team is good, and I still 36 starred with it. So no big issues here. I also tried slotting in Yai. It wasn't great, but it wasn't bad. You lose some of Neuvillette's passive. You lose the reduction from Kazuha and from VV and the damage bonus, but but it was still decent. I still cleared. This team was noticeably better. Was it better than the official variant? Was it that much worse? It was a little worse, but wasn't that noticeable. I think it's one of those things is never going to be better than the official option, but it's not that much worse that if you like don't have official, don't want to build official, or don't want to play official for whatever reason, you just really want to use Yaimiko here, then it's fine. Now, the next team archetype we've tested were Nilou teams. Nilou Nahida Baiju was the one I tested the most. I did not test Kirara, although I do think Kirara C4 would work. Kirara C0, which is what I think I have C1. I don't think it'll work until you at least have C4. So I didn't test it because otherwise you're just going to run out of application. It's just not going to work. Yayao, again, is going to run into the same problems that other resistance interruption lacking comps did, was that you get knocked around too much. Probably is fine, again, in AoE, not super aggressive enemy scenarios. But Baiju, I found, this team was quite good. It worked very well, both in single target and in AoE. It was a great team. Very good. Is it better than Ayato? Is it better than whatever? We'll save that for tomorrow. No, but it was still very good. Not my favorite Nilou team, but it was still a great team overall. Now, I also wanted to do some pure free-to-play friendly stuff. If you say, I know a lot of my Hyperbloom teams and stuff have had Nahida, so I wanted to make sure I tested Dendro main character as well. So I tried DMC. I tested both Raiden and Kuki here, and I tested Zhongli. I liked it. I thought it was decent. I didn't like them playing Circle Impact with Dendro main character. I also found that because I couldn't quick swap into him very often, it was very hard to keep his energy up, even though I was running Fav with an energy recharge Sans. It was a little bit rough, but you can play around it. You can make it work. This team is totally viable. Again, easily be able to 36 star this Abyss anyways. And I did test out Kuki here. That was fine. And I tested Layla here. This again started to feel a little more cope. I think the lack of Dendro application from Dendro MC along with the cryo wasn't quite vibing, or maybe it was just the lack of the hydro damage reduction from Zhongli's Jade Shield. Whatever it was, this started to feel noticeably worse. Tried to use Beidou here. Didn't really like it. Felt kind of bad. I tried to use Rosaria here. I didn't like it. I didn't see the point. It didn't feel very good. So overall, DMC with Zhongli, good enough. DMC with Layla and Kuki starts to feel not good enough. That's my opinion, but it's not that you can't make it work. It just starts to feel more and more cope. Whew, next archetype. Let's talk about some vaporized teams. My favorite one was Bennett, Xiangling, Zhongli. I do really like the defensive utility that Zhongli provides, and he does give some resistance down for both Pyro and Hydro. It's also nice because there's no worry about rotations or setups. You just do your thing and go. And also really interesting thing about this is that there's no circle impact on this team. Because Neuvillette doesn't scale from Bennett at all, he has no benefit to being in Bennett's circle, and usually he's protected by Zhongli, so he heals himself anyway. So Bennett's sort of useless on this team for Neuvillette. His main purpose is just to buff Xiangling, and Xiangling snapshots him. So as long as you cast Xiangling's burst within Bennett's circle, you can move around freely after that. So it's a Bennett team that doesn't have circle impact, which is really interesting. I found the team performed shockingly well. I think just Xiangling is just very strong, and Neuvillette's personal damage is good as well. So even though they're not being like boosted to high heaven with Kazuha, just the team overall, the synergy just worked very, very well. I think if you're going to use this team in AoE, Kazuha is going to be the preferred choice. In single target, I would actually highly recommend Zhongli, because in single target, Neuvillette's attacks only provide a little bit of hydro application. Unlike Child, you can set up double swirl setups because his skill, Child's skill, provides 2 units of hydro application, meaning that you can apply hydro, then apply pyro with Bennett, then you can get a double swirl with Kazuha. With Neuvillette, it's not the case. You can't really get a double swirl in single target. If you're in AoE, you can apply hydro with one enemy with Neuvillette's normal attack, then apply pyro to another enemy, and then you can use Kazuha to swirl all the enemies together, and then you get your damage bonus. They all get resistance down, and you can go to town with your Bennett Kazuha, with Bennett Xiangling, and then Neuvillette, and that's going to be really, really good. This is probably a really, really strong AoE team, and if, like, say you don't have Child, you want to use Xingqiu on the other side, you want to have an AoE team with pyro, with hydro, etc., this is a great option. I think this team is really, really good, and for more aggressive enemies and for single target, I recommend Zhongli. I didn't actually try this one with Layla. I expect it to be noticeably worse because you don't have that resistance down. But that wasn't the only Xiangling team I tried. I also did Burgeon with Xiangling. It was fine, I guess. Again, there's 2 big problems I had with this team. I didn't like getting knocked around a lot, and I didn't like how much energy Xiangling needed. I would never play this team, but I guess it's okay. I also tried it with Layla in the last spot just to have a bit more survivability and also eat up some of the burning aura. I didn't really like it either. Again, the energy that Xiangling needs without having another pyro on this team, even if it was another pyro and not just Bennett, it's just too much. Not a fan. And that was all the teams I've tested. There were a couple characters that I was not able to test because I don't have them. I was not able to test him with Mona. I was not able to test him with Venti, and I was not able to test him with Albedo, which is unfortunate. I would have liked to see the synergies with them. I mean, I think Venti is pretty self-explanatory. As long as Venti works, he's going to be an incredible partner for Neuvillette. Neuvillette's charge attack is way big enough to hit in Venti's circle, and they're gonna have great synergy together. I don't think Albedo is usually going to be the best option. I think Zhongli is going to usually be superior, and I don't think double Geo is going to be that crazy. Maybe with some future characters, maybe Farina, maybe like double Hydro, double Geo could work, but then you're losing out on a lot of Neuvillette's passive. So I don't really see Albedo being a great partner, but I don't think he'll be a bad partner either. And Mona, I think, could be okay, but I think her Omen just doesn't last all that long. So I don't see her being the best partner. Plus, you don't get that third stack for his passive. So, but let me know if you've tested him with Albedo, Venti, and Mona in the comments. And if you see anyone's experience, like that comment so it rises to the top so other people can see those too. Now let's talk about my build for him, what I recommend for his build guide. I tested him with both of for level. You do want to level 90 this character eventually. It's not absolutely urgent. It's not as urgent as your Hyper Bloom trigger or your Aggravate character or your Swirling Animo character. But because he scales primarily off of HP and you get HP only from yourself, you don't get any from your weapon, unlike base attack, which also comes from your weapon. He is higher priority than like attack scaling characters, and he's also does a large percent of your team's damage. So every little of HP you can get is worth it. Eventually you do want to level 90 him. For talents, by far the most important thing is going to be leveling up his normal attack. I would level up his skill and burst too, but I would definitely prioritize. If I was going to choose to level up my Neuvillette, I wouldn't go 999. I would go 1088 before I would go 999, right? I would go 977. I would go 1077 before I would go, 999, just because like leveling up these up, yeah, you get some damage, and it is decent damage, like it's worth getting, but it's not by far the main portion of his damage. The main portion of his damage is his charge attacks, and they are a lot of damage. So I think that that crowning his talent is going to be worth it here. And obviously you don't need to crown his talent for him to be good. You're not going to do that until the late game, until you have good artifacts, etc., etc. You can watch my full character building ultimate guide for that, but eventually that's something you can do. And on a character like this that does so much damage from his multipliers, that's something that can be considered worth it. Ooh. For his weapons, obviously his signature weapon is going to be his best weapon, and it's his best weapon by not a small margin. It is by far the best. I think it's if I'm not mistaken, it is the largest difference between a signature weapon and the second best option, if you don't count R5 battle pass. And I decided not to test the battle pass because I didn't want to muddy any of my testing with learning this new weird rotation, and I would only be able to get it R1 anyways, so its actual performance would be not very different, if barely better than the prototype Amber, but it'd be more of a pain to set up. So it's not really worth considering until you can get R5. And so I decided not to test it. But this weapon versus the free-to-play weapon, about a 30% increase. It's a massive increase. And like I said, he does a huge amount of the team's damage. I tested him extensively with the weapon, and not quite as extensively without the weapon, but I just wanted to get I did a lot of games just to see, or a lot of Abyss runs just to see how it felt, how the difference feels. And I will say, if you go from the prototype Amber to the Tomb of Eternal Flow, you will notice it. It is noticeable. It's not a tiny increase. It's noticeable. It's not necessary by any means. I still very comfortably 36 starred, very, very comfortably. And I didn't feel like he was lacking in power. I feel like he's a complete character at C0. It's kind of how I feel about Hu Tao. Her Staff of Homa is a very large increase from her other weapon, but she still feels very, very strong at C0. And that's where I think Neuvillette is. And I think it's, Neuvillette means rejoice. I'll go more into his power level in tomorrow's video. But for now, you can be happy knowing that you're going to have a very strong character just with the prototype Amber. And then if you do decide to go for the signature weapon either now or sometime in the future, you will be rewarded for it. So that's really, really good. Both of these weapons increase HP and do some energy restoration, and then the signature gives an absolute stratospheric amount of crit damage. So that's really, really nice. Something to note about the prototype Amber is I only do have a refinement 2, but just to keep in mind, getting high refinements doesn't actually matter in terms of damage. It's only in terms of comfort. And prototype Amber is one of those weapons that normally weapons will double in their stats. So the Widsith at R1 is 240 elemental mastery, but at R5 it's 480. Prototype Amber is not like that. It only increases by 50% in both the energy restoration and the party healing. I do think the party healing is kind of nice because sometimes other characters will take damage, and so although Neuvillette can heal himself, the other party members don't heal. So there is one nice benefit, at least, to having the Prototype Amber over his signature weapon or over any other weapon. Obviously, you'd rather, take the extra damage that this one provides, but at least there's some utility. And the fact that it gives that energy restoration is really, really nice. I never found myself wanting for energy with either of these. I do have some energy on my artifact substats, so we can talk about artifacts next. These are my Neuvillette stats, and this might look very, very good, especially considering this isn't actually 50 crit rate. The Mora Hunter gives another 36% crit rate, so it's actually 86 over 271. That might look absolutely ridiculous, but when you've got a weapon that gives 88% crit damage, it's not as crazy as you think. Let's look at my artifact stats. You can see that we have under 200 crit value, so you double the crit rate and add it to the crit damage. We're looking at about 185. It's not a crazy amount of crit damage by any means. There's not a crazy amount of crit value by any means. Future Jello here, I neglected to talk about his best artifact set. The Mora Hunter artifact set is going to be the best for him. It synergizes with him perfectly because he takes away his HP from his charge attack and also heals himself with his Source Power Droplet, so he's always going to have full stacks of it. It's the best set. You definitely want to go for it if you can. In the meantime, you can go for the 4-piece Heart of Depth. You definitely don't want to farm the Heart of Depth set, but if you already have a set lying around, you can absolutely throw it on him while you farm the new set. And similarly, if you want to do a 2-piece with HP. I didn't see a Calyx for the Nymph stream. After normal charge and plunging attacks, elemental skills and energy bursts hit opponents, 1 stack of mirrored Nymph stream will appear. So this should be good on him too. So if you have this set, you can use that. If you have Heart of Depth, you have that. If you want to do a 2-piece hydro damage from this piece and Heart of Depth, do that. You can do 2-piece HP. You can do 4-piece HP. If you want to see Calyx on these artifact sets, check out the Genshin Scientist. He did great calcs on Neuvillette here. And while you're at it, you can also check out Judgement. He gave me a ton of team ideas from his Twitch stream, so you can go check him out as well. So we can look at my individual pieces. I actually think they're reasonably relatable. Got 26 crit damage here, no HP, a bit of ER, 25 crit damage, good crit rate, good energy recharge, HP. This is a really good piece, but this is where we start falling off. This piece is garbage. Only 2 useful rolls. Elemental Mastery wasted, defense wasted, attack wasted. Goblet, attack wasted, crit rate is only 2 rolls, attack wasted, HP is okay, it's flat HP. And then we have ourselves a pretty good circlet as our off piece. So really not an amazing artifact set at all. And so all of the testing, all the clears you've seen are mostly they are done with his signature weapon, but I've thrown in some of the ones with the Prototype Amber as well. And the reason why I chose to test mostly with the signature weapon is just because my artifact quality is low. So if you have Prototype Amber, but you're able to get a larger amount of artifact quality, then you'll most likely see some performance in between the two. So that's kind of why I decided to do my showcases with the signature weapon, just to compensate for the fact that my artifact quality is kind of trash. And a true Neuvillette main, you're gonna crown his normal attack, which mine wasn't crowned for any of the testing, and you're going to actually get a good artifact set, because this is not good, especially since you can go. So looking at his stats, you want to go for an HP percent Sands. That's non-negotiable. You can go for either a hydro damage bonus or an HP goblet. You'd prefer a hydro damage bonus, but if you haven't got one yet, then you can go for HP. I unfortunately just haven't gotten a good HP one either, so this is all I'm stuck with. And for the circlet, again, you can go, as long as you didn't go for, you don't want to go for 2 HP main stats generally, but you can go for an HP main stat on your circlet as well if it has a really high amount of crit value and you don't have a good circlet. So those are options you can go. There's no reason for me to pick any of those options. None of my pieces rolled any good. I tried to hope this one would roll a ton of crit damage, but it did not. So that's all. That's what we're running here. For energy recharge, technically you can get away with 0 energy recharge if you're running either a signature or R5 Prototype Amber. I really like the amount of recharge I had. I wouldn't really want to go for less because I also had some Favonius weapons on most of my teammates. So I would ideally like a couple rolls of recharge, but it's definitely not necessary. You want to test that out and find for yourself what ends up working for ER, but you don't need all that much. And just keep in mind, even though you are getting a huge amount of crit rate from the passive, because he has a crit damage ascension and a crit damage weapon, if you're going for this, you really actually don't get that much crit rate aside from this. So I still got away with running a crit rate hat So it's not necessarily that you're going to go for a crit damage hat. You may go for a crit rate hat and still have this. And another reason why, before I forget, that either the circlet or the goblet can be HP, it's especially true if you're running the signature, which gives so much crit damage. If you are running the prototype amber, the HP is going to be less valuable because you're getting so much HP here, and it's going to be more important for you to get a crit damage or crit rate circlet over the HP. It's still viable, but just something to be aware of. For constellations, we talked about a C1 giving him interruption resistance, but it doesn't only give interruption resistance, it also makes it so you get an automatic stack of his talent. So the talent where you need the multiple characters in your party. So if you have only, if you can have another character that has the same type and still get the 160% bonus, which is pretty big. Not that big right now, but almost definitely the Archon is going to be best in slot in his teams. So you're almost definitely going to run the Archon with him, and you will be able to more easily run the Archon if you have the Constellation 1. Is it worth getting? I don't know. I wasn't able to test the Constellation 1 before, so we're going to have to, I would wait and see other people and see their testing. I do think it's probably going to be a good constellation for him, especially if you plan on getting the Archon. But for now, I would just get him C0. He's already so strong, especially if you already have Zhongli, but even if not, Layla's really good. Beto can work. Again, not as big of a fan of Beto, but there's other options. So I would hold off and wait for the rerun to see if you still want to go for those constellations. C2 gives him more crit damage. Very nice. Might make it even more okay to go for HP main stats. A normal attack upgrade, that's probably going to be a pretty large increase. That's C3. I'm not going to go over the other ones because I don't, you know, that's not what I do on this channel. It's not a whale channel. But if you want to early invest in him, just know that it can be worth it. I think that he's a character that does reward that investment. I think Genshin's knocked that out of the park with this character, to be honest. They've made a strong character that's not without faults by any means, but there's a strong character. They have good free-to-play options, but they also have good options for the dedicated fans. The weapon, the C1, the C2, the C3. You're going to be satisfied with this character at whatever investment level you choose to go for, and you don't have to feel pressure to get a high amount. But again, we'll talk about more of the power level tomorrow. And finally, for Overworld and Aesthetic, I haven't played him that much in the Overworld, but because I think there's something funny you can do. Yeah, you can just hover over the water as you're using your attacks, which is really, really kind of cool. It's not something I expected, and you actually get, it's actually kind of funny because if you don't have his charge attacks ready, then you actually get more charging time by going over the water. So I'll do it again here. Look at this. Oh, come on. Okay. See, even as we're charging, we're still floating. And the fact that we didn't have any droplets means we can go further. But I think he's a totally good character for the Overworld. He has tons of team comps. The only downside for me is he doesn't work with the Yelan, so I'll end up never using him in the Overworld because I'm addicted to Yelan in the Overworld. There's no way I'm using anything else. So for me, not a great Overworld character, but I will say in terms of his design, he has to be one of the best design characters in Genshin. Like, he just has to be like this. The way his coat looks, I would get this weapon just for drip. I think I will. Like, look at that coat. Look at the scales on the side. It's like the back, the front, the hair, his burst. He's just an unbelievably cool character. He's got to be one of the best design characters in Genshin. And you know, would I prefer that he's not a man? Yes, but he's probably the coolest man in the game. So I'm very, very happy with him, and I'm very excited to get him on my account because this was the pre-release account. Subscribe to see tomorrow's video. Join our Discord if you want to chat. Check out my Patreon if you want to support the channel. If you don't want to do any of those things, just watching the video has been more than enough. Thanks so much. Bye for now.